Coming up on this episode, recapping the Warriors' victory over the Spurs in San Antonio yesterday. A look ahead to potentially their biggest game of the season against the Dallas Mavericks on Wednesday. I'll outline why that might be the case and a tribute to a Warrior legend who retired on Monday. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. About 24 hours after the Warriors got a 112-102 victory against the San Antonio Spurs. Man, I don't know about you guys. Let me know in the comments. But Saturday's loss at home to the Spurs really took it out of me because I like to think that I'm generally a fairly optimistic person in sport, in life in general. Like when I'm following my favorite sporting teams, I'm always optimistic of them potentially doing this and winning that and whatever else. But yesterday felt like I had just a pessimistic outlook on this game from the outset. And I probably shouldn't have, because it started off even before the game in better fashion, I think, than Saturday, because I liked the starting lineup so much more than what Steve Kerr went with on Saturday. So we saw Clay back in the starting lineup in place of Pods, which I just think with Steph out, as I said on last episode, it's absolutely crucial that he starts to give the Warriors that shooting capacity without Steph. And then they went back to the starting front court that's obviously worked so well for them over the last couple of months with Wiggs, JK and Draymond. So all of a sudden, you know, a much better starting lineup to go out there with. And so I probably should have felt positive from that. But geez, throughout the whole game, I just felt, I mean, it didn't start off overly well that the Warriors conceded 37 points in the first quarter, which, you know, put them down 8, put them behind the 8 ball. And it was just, there's a pessimistic outlook for me on this game for some reason. I think it really stemmed from the fact that they'd lost so poorly at home on Saturday. The fact Wemby was back in, although I'm always excited to watch Wemby play, so there was that element to it as well. But they got back within 2 at halftime, but even then I felt like, are they really going to win this game? I'm not sure. I don't know. Like, just a really pessimistic outlook on the game. The Spurs started the third quarter on an 8-0 run, forced a Steve Kerr timeout. And at that point, I was consigned to us losing, basically. And then almost out of nowhere to me, like there was no thought that this was going to happen. The Spurs their offense ground to a halt completely. They flat out almost couldn't score over the remaining 10 minutes of the third quarter. As I said, they started out on that 8-0 run. And then for the remaining 10 minutes of the third quarter, the Warriors outscored them 32-10. And plenty of that has got to go to the Warriors, and credit to them for the stifling defense that they played, lifting their intensity on that end of the floor. There was also a huge element of the Spurs finally just missing shots after they hadn't done for the last 6 quarters against Golden State. Some wide open 3-point attempts that they just started missing, which is bound to happen. You're going to come back to the average at some point or rather, and they obviously had a season best shooting performance against the Warriors on Saturday. So it was nice for them to start actually missing some shots. And then, I mean, obviously that was a huge turnaround, but I couldn't actually quite believe what I was seeing, really, just by the fact that Spurs stopped scoring completely. And it all happened very quickly. I felt that the Warriors were down 10 in huge trouble. And then all of a sudden, by the end of the third quarter, they're up 12 and have a comfortable advantage. Of course, I don't think any of us feel comfortable when the Warriors enter a fourth quarter with a double-digit lead based on what we've seen this season. And that was, again, the case. I again felt pretty pessimistic about what might happen in that fourth quarter. And the Spurs certainly threatened. I think they got back to maybe 8 on a couple of occasions, but their offense never really rediscovered the kind of rhythm and groove that was needed to produce a comeback victory in that fourth quarter. And then the Warriors were able to close it out. They weren't great offensively themselves in the fourth quarter, but their defense was good enough to be able to hold off any chance of a Spurs comeback. So kind of a weird game because I felt kind of negative almost for the majority of it, but then the Warriors still come away with a 10-point win. Certainly a team effort, which is obviously what is needed in Steph's absence. You lose 28 points per game practically. You're not going to make that up in one play. You're not going to have a guy come out from 0 points to 28. You're not going to have JK go from 20 points a game or 15 points a game, whatever, to 40 plus points. Like, it's going to have to be a team effort. And I think they did a really good job of that yesterday. 6 players between 13 and 22 points. JK led the way with 22 on 9 of 18 shooting, I think. Don't think it was his best game, but again, the fact he can have 22 points in an average game for him just goes to show how far he's grown this season. Clay had 21, but I think was he 8 of 21 shooting, didn't shoot the ball overly well, particularly from the mid-range. I think he was 4 of 10 from 3, which is fine, but otherwise didn't shoot the ball overly well. I think Chris Paul was the big one here. So CP3 had 19, 8, 9 assists. I think he only had 1 assist at halftime, so he really was able to control the game in the second half. I'm going to talk about him more a bit later, but I thought he was probably the player of the game, the most valuable player for the Warriors. I thought it was a really good bounce-back game of sorts from Pods, who's been a bit down lately, and obviously he's been moved to the bench in this one. He had, I think, 14 points off the bench, made 3 threes of his 5 attempts, so starting to rediscover the 3-ball there. And it was a better game from Andrew Wiggins as well in terms of him attacking the rim as well. A nice little bounce-back game from him because he's, like, I think, and I wrote about this the other day, like, it's underrated how much his play determines the outcome, determines results for Golden State. Like, if you look at his form, it's kind of mirrored the team's form this season, which is, largely underwhelming and inconsistent for the first half of the season. And then he has a really, good patch of form kind of just before the deadline and in the few weeks afterwards. And there's no doubt that during that period, the Warriors are at their best form of the season. Like, the Warriors need an up and about really good Andrew Wiggins to be anywhere close to their best. That's just a fact. And so it was really nice to see him after, having 4 games off, which kind of, rightly or wrongly, like, I'm happy, like, he can have that 4-game absence. Obviously, like, personal stuff comes before basketball. I understand that, but there's no doubt that it did break the momentum that he had been growing in his season. And unfortunately, he comes back after that 4-game absence and he has 2 games where he plays less than 15 minutes. His game against the Spurs, the first time out on Saturday, was okay, but 11.6 rebounds really isn't going to do it when you need more without Steph in the lineup. But I thought he played pretty well on Monday, so hopefully this is a sign of things to come for him and for the Warriors trying to get back to their best. So it was a really team effort. And then, of course, we can't go any further without mentioning the huge highlight slam dunk from Trayce Jackson-Davis over Wemby with just over a minute to go in the fourth quarter, when that was the game-sealing bucket, really. They were up 8 at that point, just over a minute to go. Spurs could have had a chance, maybe a very slight chance, but if the Warriors make a couple of mistakes, Spurs hit their shots, potentially there's a chance there, and TJD snuffs out any chance of a Spurs comeback with that. You don't even have any words for it. So Wemby tries to go for the steal. TJD kind of gets a step on him and absolutely dunks on his head. It was absolutely unbelievable to see. Certainly the highlight of the game, potentially one of the highlights of the Warriors season. I thought in terms of Wemby's play, because I'm just so excited to see that man play because it's something we've never seen before, and he played well. But there's still so many times when he settles for either 3-point jumpers or kind of step back jump shots. Like, there was a play, I think, in the fourth quarter there where he had JK on the block and JK forced him into kind of a step back jumper off glass, which just rimmed out. Like, it nearly went in, but I was thinking, like, really, like, this guy's, the Spurs have still got to put him in a better situation to be able to finish around the rim. And I thought the Warriors did a reasonable job of making a reasonable percentage of his shots be taken from outside the paint, and a lot of jump shots, which is certainly what you're going to live for at this stage. And as I said, the Spurs are going to have to do a better job moving forward of putting him in better positions to score. But the fact that he still had 27 points, 14 rebounds, it was still a good game from him, but I think the Warriors were able to curb his influence enough. And then there was obviously not as much of the BS 3-point shooting that we saw on Saturday in that Spurs 13-point win. So a good result from the Warriors in general, and capped off with that highlight dunk from TJD, who was really good as well. I think that was his 5th career double-double, 13 points, 10 rebounds off the bench. There's one thing I do want to mention, and a big thing here, is that there's a philosophical and rotational shift here, but more so, I suppose, philosophical, just with the way that the Warriors want to play, with TJD coming into the lineup and with what Jonathan Kuminga's done so far this season. With or without Steph, the Warriors are playing in a much different manner to what we've seen for much of the last decade. It's been so successful, obviously. But if you look at on the season, so points in the paint, they are 21st on the season for points in the paint. And then over the last 6 games, which has been the period where TJD is now getting a consistent role. So he's played at least 16 minutes in each of the last 6 games. And in that period, they are 7th in points in the paint. And I don't think there's any coincidence there that TJD, more consistent role, more athletic, young, springy, two-way presence at the center position rather than below the rim players in Kevon Looney and Dario Saric. Like, that is a big difference right there. And it's shown up in that statistic, points in the paint, 7th over the last 6 games. They've won the points in the paint battle in 5 of the 6 games, including, and I was looking back through these 6 games, they actually won the points in the paint battle against the Celtics when they lost by 52. So again, that goes to show, although the Celtics 3-point shooting in that game was off the charts, and that's obviously what allowed them to win so comprehensively. But then the only one they've lost over the last 6 games was actually the one in Toronto. But otherwise, they are beating other teams in points in the paint, which is such a rare case for Golden State for much of the last few years here. And then if you also look at the blocks per game as well, so on the season they're 27th in blocks per game at 4.3 on average. And then in these last 6 games, again, with TJD getting a consistent role, they are 12th in blocks. Nothing huge amazing, but it's still a considerable rise from 27th at 5.7 blocks per game. So there is a philosophical difference that in the way the Warriors are trying to play in terms of getting more stuff at the basket with springy young athletes like TJD, like JK, obviously. And this is a direction we're going to see more of. Now, obviously, without Steph, the numbers are probably going to be a bit greater in terms of points in the paint than what they would be with Steph back in the lineup. But even once he does return, like, this is just the way the Warriors play now. They are going to get, a lot of buckets inside, whether it's, Chris CP3, TJD pick and roll, whether it's JK getting out on the floor in transition. This is just who they are now. And I spoke about on last episode, the roster is actually, there's not much 3-point shooting outside Steph and Clay. There really isn't. Like, Wiggins has been up and down. Moses has been mostly down over these last 5 or 6 games with his 3-point shooting. JK is not a great 3-point shooter. Obviously, they've gone away from Dario as kind of that stretch big. CP3 shooting the ball pretty well, but he's not a high volume 3-point shooter by any means. So this is who the Warriors are now, and it's a philosophical difference. And whether it works or not, we don't know. Like, whether it yields success in the long term, that remains to be seen. I think if you go back to Saturday's game against the Spurs, that was one of the real times this season where you look at it and think, is the youth really that good? Like, is the youth that good? Because if it is, then we probably shouldn't be losing by 13 at home to the Spurs without Wemby. And I think there was a bit of criticism there and a bit of a pessimistic outlook on, okay, how good is JK and Moses and TJD and Pods? How good are they really? Like, because if they are any good, they should be winning, and they're playing big roles, they should be winning that game against San Antonio. But I thought, Monday's win, obviously a bit of a turnaround on that with JK leading the way and TJD playing a big role and Pod starting to hit his threes. So it's a kind of an interesting outlook on the Warriors going forward. But regardless of kind of the success that comes with it, I think it's a necessary step that Golden State needed to take to kind of revolutionize the way they play, but also just keep up with the league. Like, you see guys like Wemby and guys like Chet Holmgren and whatever else, and you see these really athletic, skilled 7-footers, and you see the way the league is going. I think it's pretty obvious that the Warriors need to get some kind of length and athleticism into their lineup rather than just relying on Steph and Clay, who are 3-point shooters and who are getting on with age, obviously. So it's something new for the Warriors, and I think it's something needed. And obviously we've seen it with JK over the last few months now and what he's been able to do. But TJD is just the next step in that, and the fact that he's now getting at least 15 minutes a game off the bench, and Looney and Saric are now completely out of the rotation. That was Loon's, third straight DNP, I think, which is something that I'd spoken about for weeks. That we all knew was coming, but it was still a pivotal moment when Steve has finally decided that, hey, this guy who's played 255 consecutive, 254, whatever it was, consecutive regular season games, he's now no longer in the rotation. And I'm going to this guy, 6'9", not overly huge necessarily, but really athletic, can provide above the rim presence on both ends of the floor. And he's a rookie, and he can go and have that high motor to be able to try and back up night after night and give real energy off the bench. And he's certainly doing that with what we saw with that highlight dunk over Wemby, and just the fact he's just finishing everything. Like he's 6 or 7 from the floor yesterday for his 13 points. The free throw shooting probably needs to improve a little bit. There's still some inconsistencies there, but he's such a bright young prospect for the Warriors. And I mean, he's not that young. We know we've spoken about the 4 years of college. He's 24 years old now. But it's so fantastic to see him be able to have a presence not only now, but obviously for the future. It's exciting times for Golden State, absolutely. So tomorrow's game against Dallas, I think this might be the biggest game of the season for the Warriors today. I truly do think it is, because this is the first of 3 meetings against Dallas over the last 18 games of the season. The Mavericks are 2.5 games now ahead of the Warriors, so they're in the 8th seed, Lakers in 9th, and the Lakers are a game ahead of the Warriors in 10th. And so the Warriors have got the Mavericks and then the Lakers later in the week. Unbelievably important matchup, as are the final 2 games against the Mavericks. Now, there's clearly a lower expectation here. So just a couple of hours ago, it was revealed that Steph wouldn't play in this game, as Steve kind of hinted at in the post game yesterday. He's continuing his recovery. He'll join the team, I think, in LA on Friday. So I suppose there's the potential that he might play against the Lakers. But obviously, without Steph, that lowers the expectation and your ability to win this game in Dallas. But I think from a Warrior fan standpoint, we should view this as, and I think the Warriors as a franchise have got to view it as, we just need to find a way to win this game. And I don't really want to hear the excuse of Steph's out. I know it is an excuse. It's clearly an excuse. I don't want to hear it. Because if you want to be a playoff team and you want to get ahead of Dallas in the standings, you find a way to win this game. You simply do that. And so I'm trying well, how does that happen? Right? How does that happen? And I think, and this was always going to be the case once Steph was out, and at any point when Steph is out this season. Fortunately, the Warriors have been really lucky, I suppose, with Steph's health over this season. The fact that he missed 2 games with a slight injury earlier in the season, then he was rested a game. And so for him to miss 3 of the first, 61 games, the Warriors have been really fortunate. But when they went back to trading for Chris Paul in the offseason, yes, they were doing it for him to be the leader off the bench and a backup point guard, but the huge value was always going to come when Steph got injured. And to have the luxury of Chris Paul, a future Hall of Fame point guard, a 12-time All-Star, able to step into those shoes, and yes, you are going to lose something. Without Steph Curry, you're always going to lose something, but you are going to minimize the damage, hopefully, by having Chris Paul on your team. And this is where the value is really going to shine. And this is a matchup, I think, where if I'm Chris Paul, I'm looking at it, I'm thinking Luka Doncic is so much a better player than Chris Paul. Like, absolutely no doubt about that. But does Chris Paul have it in him to be able just to control this game in a manner that we might not necessarily expect from him at this point of his career? And if I'm him and I still think of myself as a high level, more than a starting caliber point guard, like a really, really good point guard in this league, even though I'm 38, nearly 39 years old. If I'm him, I think, yeah, Luka's a better player. But you know what? This Dallas defense is not good. It's one of the worst. They rank 22nd in defensive rating this season. This is a bad Dallas defense. Kyrie and Luka are both better players than me. I'm not sure Chris Paul wouldn't necessarily acknowledge that, but I'm sure the rest of us do. But even if he did acknowledge that, could he think to himself, yeah, like I can control this game. I can pick apart every issue with the Dallas defense throughout a 48-minute game and will my team to victory and monopolize the game in the way that I want to and the way that I've been able to control games for nearly the last 2 decades. I just think it's a huge game for Chris Paul. And I think that's the way the Warriors are going to win. If he and Draymond and what Draymond does defensively, if those two experienced guys can just find a way to get the game on their terms. And there's going to have to be a balance, obviously, between, as there's been a balance the whole season between, Chris Paul's methodical approach and, the Warriors still trying to play at a pace and using the athleticism of their young guys and stuff like that. But I do think, you look at this game and you just think, can Chris Paul pull a rabbit out of the bag here? Can he just do something to be able to be... He's not going to put up more numbers than Luka. Heck, he might not put up more numbers than Kyrie. But just for the value of... For the impact that they have on the game, for the value that they have on the game, can Chris Paul be a more impactful player on the game than Luka Doncic? I know that's a shocking thing for me to say, to even question whether that's even possible. I think Chris Paul should think it's possible, and therefore I think Warrior fans should think it's possible. That in a one-off game, it's on the road too, but the Warriors have kind of thrived on the road this season. They've got a better road record than they do home record. So I just, with the issues that the Mavericks have defensively, I'm just looking at Chris Paul. I'm thinking, what can you pull out of your bag here? Because the Warriors desperately need it. This is what we call in AFL terms for us in Australia, watching Australian rules football. When you get to this part of the season, the last quarter of the season, and you are coming up against a team that is in the similar standing to you in the competition. The Mavericks obviously 8th now, the Warriors 10th. We call this in the AFL, every game is worth 4 points, but when you come up against a team like this, we call this an 8-point game. It's almost worth double. Such is the enormity of the game. This is an 8-point game, is how we describe it in AFL terms. And so the Warriors need to find a way. It's as simple as that. They need to find a way, however it is, and I think it might largely come down to Chris Paul. The Warriors need to find a way to win this game. And I do not want to hear the excuses of no Steph Curry. I don't, because it doesn't matter. He's out. It is what it is. And the pure fact is the Warriors need to win this game. And I think it's the most important game they've had so far this season, because if they lose this game, it is a long, long, long way back from the 18 with 17 games remaining. It's a long way back, and to the point where it might be unrealistic. And so you just need to win this game. Thoroughly looking forward to it and hoping, optimistic for all the pessimistic talk from earlier in the episode. I'm optimistic that the Warriors might be able to do something here, because Dallas do have a bad defense, and potentially the Warriors can pick apart at that, and Chris Paul can pick apart at that. So looking forward to it. The last thing I wanted to talk about on this episode, Otto Porter Jr. A kind of surprising retirement yesterday. Just 30 years old, 11 years in the league. Now, not overly surprising when you look at the health battles that he's had over the last 5 or 6 years. Practically every season for the last 5 years, aside from the season that he was with the Warriors, and even towards the latter portion of that season, he had some injury issues as well. So when you look at that, maybe it's not overly surprising. But 30 years old is still quite young, obviously. I had a bit of, I'm not going to say it went viral, but I had quite a few reactions to my tweet yesterday that stated that it was crazy that Buddy Hield is older than Otto Porter Jr. Apparently, I offended a few people on that. I apologize to them, I suppose. That was in no way shade at Buddy Hield. It's just, it's amazing, really. It's amazing that Buddy Hield, who I still consider as a young or middle tier age player in this league, is older than Otto Porter Jr., who feels like he's been around and he has been around longer than Buddy, because Buddy played 4 years at college, I think. So he has been around longer, but it feels like Otto, with all the health issues and whatever else, it feels like he's 33, 34, 35. The fact that Steph is 5 years older or nearly 6 years older than OPJ is absolutely unbelievable. So it's also very disappointing, the fact that his career has come to an end like this and not in the way that he would like. However, he did say in his kind of statement yesterday, his dream of playing the NBA was capped with the championship in 2022, and he will forever hold a place in the hearts of Warrior fans for what he was able to do in that season, for what he was able to do in the success that the Warriors had. The 2022 championship, I think, is a championship that, for most fans, I think, and for me personally, that championship was much more enjoyable, so much more validating, I think, than the 2017, 2018, and potentially even 2015 as well, just because, the Warriors had been written off so much kind of after the 2019 finals and before that 2022 championship. So for Otto to play such a big part in that, I think he's always going to be remembered. He's always going to be a legend among Warrior fans, and someone that goes down in Warrior history, and most certainly should. And the one way I kind of, and my story of OPJ, and the way that I want to describe him, and describe his impact, I suppose, on me. And so if you look at sport, right? I'm addicted to sport. I watch sport every day. But a lot of you listening, we consume so much sport on a daily basis. So much, whether it's watching sport, talking about sport, listening to people talking about sport, podcasts, YouTube, like whatever it may be. Like, we consume so much sport. But if you look at just the sport itself, I consume that much of it that a lot of it will just wash away, particularly the NBA, when you've got games every day, you've got an 82-game season. Like, I'm not going to remember every single game. That's just fact. It's impossible. So in 5 years' time, I'm not going to remember the fact that the Golden State Warriors beat the San Antonio Spurs 112-102 in San Antonio on the 11th of March, 2024. I'm not going to remember that. Now, I may remember it for TJD's dunk on Wemby, particularly depending on how the careers of both those players play out. I might remember it for that. But, like, let's be honest. Who did the Warriors play on November 7? I don't know who did they play on November 7? I don't know. So my whole point is we consume so much sport that a lot of it washes away. And really, we just remember the defining moments. And there's so many moments in my life that I look back to, and from a really early age. And there's moments in life that you can just reflect on so vividly. And for me, being a sports addict, like, most of them have to do with sport. So, when I was, my earliest memory of life essentially is going to my aunt and uncle's place, watching the 2002 AFL Grand Final when I was 5 years old, and my team Collingwood playing, and we lost a close game that we probably could have or should have won as huge outsiders against the Brisbane Lions. So that's like my earliest memory of life, essentially. And there's so many along the way where you just remember sporting moments, right? Or not just sporting moments, but other things to do with sport. So if you look at it from off the field, like Kobe, I will vividly remember waking up that morning and seeing, like, the tweet notifications about Kobe Bryant dying in a helicopter crash, and I remember just sitting in bed, like laying in bed, like it's 7 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and there was just this empty feeling where I was just like looking up at the ceiling for an hour without doing anything, because I was just in total and utter shock. There's other stuff, like I remember vividly watching, again in my bedroom, watching the opening day of, what was it, the 2016-17 or 2017-18 season. I actually can't remember what season it was. I just remember like where I was and just remember watching it. Gordon Hayward's broken leg in his first game as a Celtic against the Cavaliers. Just vividly remember that. Just where I was thinking, what is going on? From a non-basketball standpoint, like I always remember being in the car with my old man when I first heard news of Phil Hughes. So for cricket fans, Phil Hughes getting hit in the back of the head. And I just always remember telling Dad, oh, there's been quite a bad incident in the Sheffield Shield. Phil Hughes has been hit and whatever else. And then I think that was on the Sunday. And then on the Thursday, he passed away. And that was like, no one dies playing cricket at the professional level. No one dies playing sport really at the professional level. And so when it does like that, that's a moment that you always remember. I always remember 2007 Ashes series, just staying on cricket. 2007 Ashes series, Australia versus England, Adelaide Oval, day 5, destined for a draw, and Australia come back and win. And I always remember, and this is also part of me reconciling with memories with my old man who passed away last year. And I remember going to school that day on I can't remember what day it was, but I was in grade 6. And I remember going to school, and it was destined for a draw. And of course, at that point, you're not really like, phones are kind of a thing, but you kind of got to hand your phone into the teacher every morning, and so you can't really get updates on the cricket score, whatever. Dad picks me up after school and asks him what the scores are, and he kind of just grins at me and looks at the radio and tells me to listen to the radio. And all of a sudden, Australia have bowled England out and are on their way to victory, which was one of the greatest wins in Test cricket history. But this is an NBA podcast, so I want to relate back to that. Game 1 of the 2018 finals was another thing for me where I'll just vividly remember sitting there watching that game thinking this is one of the best games I've ever seen. LeBron James goes for 50 plus points, is completely outgunned against the Golden State team with 4 future Hall of Famers, potentially 5 if you want to count Iggy. And that was kind of Cleveland's best punch, and that was one of the best games I've ever seen. And I knew from after they lost, I knew that was their best punch. They threw their best punch. The Warriors took it, won the game, and the series was never going to be a contest after that. But my whole point is, like, there's moments. And anyway, this is a long-winded way to get to the fact that Boxing Day 2021, which is Christmas Day for those of you in America, so my family owns a farm down on Bruny Island, which is about 2 hours away from where I live. It's probably about 45 minutes. You got to 45 minutes away, then you got to catch a ferry to go another 15 minutes, then it's like another 45 minutes on the island to the farm. I listened to the first kind of 3 quarters of the game on my on the phone through my car on the way down as I'm driving down to Bruny Island for the couple hour trip. And then I just remember getting down there and I'm like, cool, I can watch this 4th quarter now. And I just vividly remember Otto Porter Jr. just like stunning the Phoenix Suns in the last 2, that 4th quarter. I think he had 10 points in the quarter, but 7 of them I think came in the last 2 minutes of the game. The Warriors were up 109-107 with just over 2 minutes to go, 2.5 minutes to go. Game on the line. Warriors were undermanned, had quite a few players out, I think with COVID and whatever else. And all of a sudden, OPJ just stands up and makes the only 3 baskets of the last 2.5 minutes of the game. No one else scored in the last 2 and a bit minutes, bar him. And it started with a baseline jump shot off a really poor Warrior offensive possession that he kind of bailed out. And then next possession, he goes off the dribble into a step-back jumper. I think it was over Jay Crowder. And Otto was really a catch-and-shoot threat, first and foremost, for the Warriors that season. You very rarely saw him get into his bag like that with, off the dribble step-back. And then he made kind of a pretty tough turning 3 in the following possession off a Draymond assist at the top of the key, and just 3 straight possessions, bucket, bucket, bucket. And it's just like, what are we watching? And then after that second one where he made the step back jump shot, he kind of has that laugh and point to the Phoenix Suns bench. And that will forever be memorable. And that's the thing. Like, this is, I'm talking about all this kind of deep stuff about, Kobe Bryant or the serious injury of Gordon Hayward, game 1 of the 2018 finals, other things from my childhood in terms of cricket and Australian rules football and whatever else. But for some reason, amongst all that is a Christmas Day or Boxing Day game, as it is for us in Australia, of Otto Porter Jr. just beating the Phoenix Suns almost by himself in the last couple of minutes. Like, that's what's in there. That's like a defining memory, right, in my life. And so Otto Porter Jr. will always be remembered for that. And also, of course, for being a part of the 2022 championship team. And I think it might be a kind of a pub quiz down the track, but if you are asked who started for the Warriors in the final 3 games of the 2022 NBA Finals, I think it goes under the radar, the fact that Otto came into the starting lineup for the last 3 games. Of course, we go back to Andre Iguodala doing that in 2015, and he won Finals MVP out of it. And Otto, he only played, I think, on an average about 15 minutes over those 3 games. He clearly didn't have the impact that Iggy necessarily had over the last 3 games of 2015. But it's kind of an eerily similar shift that happened after Game 4, where in both series, the Warriors are down 2-1. They're facing a Game 4 on the road. Obviously, if you go down 3-1, you're in huge, huge trouble. And, Steve goes smaller. And it was taking out Andrew Bogut for Iggy in 2015, and it was taking out Kevon for OPJ in 2022. So I think that can never be forgotten and will never be forgotten for me. So between the Suns game on Christmas, he's always going to be, remembered by me. So a shout out to him for a very, very good career. Now, maybe slightly disappointing based on the injuries and what he's had to go through health-wise over the last 4 or 5 years is certainly disappointing. But nonetheless, an NBA champion and a guy that will forever be remembered by Warrior fans, that is for sure. So shout out to Otto Porter Jr. Hope retirement is good to him. And as I keep saying, he'll be forever remembered by me and so many Warrior fans. There's no doubt about that. Other than that, guys, sorry for that kind of whole OPJ tribute went off in a lot of different directions. So I apologize if it got a bit boring or a bit weird there for a second. But other than that, we'll finish it up there. Looking forward to the game against the Mavericks tomorrow. Hopefully, as I said, the Warriors can find a way to pull out a victory. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on Twitter or X. If you've got any feedback, any comments that you would like me to read out on the next podcast, whatever else, then just let me know on YouTube, or you can tweet me. Follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. Other than that, let's hope for a Warriors victory over the Mavericks tomorrow, and then I'll be back before the Lakers game later in the week. Cheers, guys.